Alright, hello again everyone, welcome back. So today we're going to look at a new nation of challenges. We're going to look at some of the things that African Americans are going to be dealing with following the American Revolutionary War. So our objectives and standards to explain the changes African Americans faced in the early years of the country and analyze the lives of African Americans during the time period. Take a moment there to read our standards, please. And our desired result. What changes and challenges did African Americans face during the early years of the new country? So the formation of anti-slavery groups following the American Revolution, the creation of a new government, caused others to rethink slavery. And there's going to be a renewed call to end slavery, and many states freed slaves who actually fought against the British during the war. Because of this, some Americans have felt, well, it shouldn't matter, we should just free all slaves. And beginning in 1775, anti-slavery societies, or groups dedicated to the elimination of slavery, began to form. So goals of the anti-slavery movement. There were members of anti-slavery groups that published writings to convince others to change their views of slavery. Members also tried to end slavery by moving slaves out of their states. There are a couple of prominent figures of the anti-slavery movement, which included Dr. Benjamin Rush, up here, and Anthony Benezet. These men had been active in the anti-slavery movement before the American Revolution, but both are going to increase their activity after the war to free slaves. So, banning slavery in northern states. The efforts of anti-slavery groups began to work, especially in northern states. In 1780, for example, the Pennsylvania Constitution gave instructions on eventually abolishing slavery, and other northern states abolished slavery by 1800. However, there were no southern states that abolished slavery, sorry about the typo there, and some states in the South did, however, take steps in the direction of abolishing slavery, but again, slavery will not be abolished in the South permanently until after the Civil War. So, involvement of government. The U.S. Congress also got involved in the fight against slavery in 1780. In 1787, the Northwest Ordinance set laws to govern the settlement of the vast Northwest Territory. So here's a map of it here that's kind of blacked out. You can see some of the states that were included, more or less so, in the Northwest Territory. We have Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, and Wisconsin. And these years here, these are the years that they became states, so don't worry about that. I just want you to focus on the blacked out part here to show you where we're talking about in terms of the Northwest Territory. So the Northwest Ordinance prohibited anyone in the territory from actually owning slaves, so this was a big victory for anti-slavery groups. So the lives of free African Americans. Now, not every African American in the country was a slave at this time. There were some African Americans that were free as well, and gaining freedom could be done so in a variety of different ways. One way was through military service. You could also be released by your owners, and there were also state laws that began to provide freedom to African Americans. Some African Americans were actually able to buy their freedom as well. Now, another way, which was common for a lot of slaves as well, if none of the other ways worked, was to run away, right? To run away to the north to gain freedom. And free African Americans lived in free communities, but they still did face limited opportunities and rights, but in a lot of cases, many of them were able to build better lives. Many of them opened businesses or had successful lives and families and things like that. So again, just some examples there. So the Constitution of slavery. When delegates met in Philadelphia to change the government, the question of slavery was also discussed. Now, delegates are not going to continue the slave trade forever, but they did approve for it for another 20 years. So they say at the end of 20 years, the slave trade, or bringing slaves over from Africa, is illegal. So in 1808 or so, or somewhere around that time, early 1800s, that's when the United States will get out of the slave trade. But, of course, people will still smuggle slaves, and, there's a lot of slaves already in captivity alone in the United States at this time. Now, the question of representation in Congress and counting slaves was also discussed. Here was the problem. People were saying in the South, well, if you're going to give us representation in Congress based on population, we have African Americans that, should count towards that. People in the North said, well, you don't actually give these people rights, you treat them like property. They shouldn't count for population. So there was the decision the delegates reached that they approved something called the 3/5 Compromise, which stated that for every 5 slaves, that equaled 3 people, and that was the agreement. Now, many, especially in the anti-slavery societies, were also very disappointed that the Constitution did not, do more or even ban slavery, and we'll see the consequences of that as well as we go through the course. Alright, so our closure. What changes and challenges did African Americans face during the early years of the new country? Think about some of the things they were facing, some of the things they were doing, as they were, going through this new country. Alright? And I hope you have a great rest of your day or night. I hope to talk to you all soon.